Coming up.
Mark Carney is a special advisor to the Liberal Party, but we all know that he's advising the Prime Minister, and he is the de facto finance minister of this government. He also happens to be sitting on the board of Stripe, as you were allocated to or alluded to earlier, and he's also said that they will not be passing on savings to consumers through a government-led initiative. So given that you guys represent small businesses that would stand to benefit from these cost savings, do you have any thoughts on Mr. Carney effectively saying no to his own government's initiative?
Mr. Stafford, I have sought from the banks through this hearing to ask for the return on equity percentage, which would not betray revenue, cost structures, any of that. Would just know just how profitable they are. Do you see that as being proprietary, just having a return on equity percentage disclosed?
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Pursuant to the motion adopted on Thursday, September 19, 2024, the committee is resuming its study on credit card practices and regulations in Canada. We are pleased today to welcome our witnesses from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Daniel Kelly, President and Chief Executive Officer. Welcome to you. Michel Auger is also here, Senior Policy Analyst, National Affairs. Thank you. From the Centre for Future Work, we're welcoming Jim Stanford, economist and director, who's joining us by Zoom, and I do see his name on screen. Good afternoon, Mr. Stanford. And from the People's Group Limited, and Chief Legal Officer, Ann Butler.
Thank you very much. And so to start the discussion, I'll turn it over to MP Patzer.
Thank you very much to everybody for attending today. I'm going to start off with CFIB, if that's all right. Mark Carney is a special advisor to the Liberal Party, but we all know that he's advising the Prime Minister, and he is the de facto finance minister of this government. He also happens to be sitting on the board of Stripe, as you were allocated to or alluded to earlier, and he's also said that they will not be passing on savings to consumers through a government-led initiative. So given that you guys represent small businesses that would stand to benefit from these cost savings, do you have any thoughts on Mr. Carney effectively saying no to his own government's initiative?
It is bizarre that we are in this situation where we have somebody who is a special advisor to the governing party that is also serving on the board of a company that is in direct conflict with a stated objective and promise from the government of which he is currently associated. I have to tell you, it is. I understand what a board member on a board of directors does, but this is super awkward. And I got to tell you, our bigger worry is for those, for all of the other acquirers. Watch closely what is happening. And if this is allowed to stand, if Stripe does not change gears and actually flow the discounts that it is supposed to small merchants, the whole process is going to fall apart. So whether it is Stripe, its board, Mr. Carney, somebody needs to move here and make this happen. This is the Deputy Prime Minister that has said in a recent statement that it is the expectation of the Government of Canada that all participants in the ecosystem will pass on these savings down to the small businesses that deserve these savings. And now we have a party that is not doing that with this very close connection to the same players. It is really outrageous.
Yeah, it really is. This is a deputy finance minister who's trying to stave off a competitor for her own job. That's for sure. One more question for you here, and just kind of getting back to the whole point about cost to payment processors here. Like I talked to a couple small businesses back home in Swift Current, and one of them, when it's busy season, they pay over $7,000 a month just alone in their fees. Like that's crazy. That's almost three. They could hire three, full-time employees yet, albeit for minimum wage or just above, but they could hire three full-time employees. Would not be incumbent on them to make sure that people are adhering to these new initiatives?
Absolutely. And look, I will say that this isn't the first time we've seen this. There were, when the Conservative government put the first round of credit card fee reductions in place after negotiating it with Visa and MasterCard, there were a couple of processors that did decide not to pass them on. But I will tell you that we, CFIB, worked closely with Minister Flaherty's office at the time. I think it was also in the transition to Joe Oliver. And those savings ultimately were passed on after some pressure from both the Finance Minister's office and externally from us. That's what my expectation is for this round, and I'm waiting to see that happen at this point in time. To your point about this aggregate savings, I've talked to tons of small business owners who say they pay more in credit card processing fees than they take home from their business themselves. That's how big a fee this is, a cost this is to SMEs.
Can you maybe just speak for a moment? And the reason I'm bringing this up is it's related to, I think, the food prices that Canadians feel like we often hear, especially Conservatives stand up in the House of Commons and talk about food prices as being a key concern that Canadians have. I certainly hear that in my community too, so I don't disagree that food prices are something that Canadians are still feeling a lot of households pressure around. And so I wanted to ask you though, there are some individuals that keep claiming that carbon pricing is having a bigger impact on food prices than I think is merited given the data. And in fact, perhaps climate change is actually having a bigger impact on food prices, perhaps. But I wanted to go back to this carbon pricing issue because it comes up a lot in our daily conversations in the House of Commons. So, Mr.
Yes,
Stanford.
Just 1 second, Mr. Turnbull. I have a point of order from Mr. Massey.
I know that we have a wide scope of trying to deal with this, but I noticed last meeting and this meeting, and perhaps we're getting really far away from credit card costs and so forth. I think it's important, and I give the parliamentary secretary credit for raising an important issue, but if it could be at least tied into somehow credit card and the expenses of consumers, I don't want to, dissuade discussion on anything, but at the same time, we're getting into food pricing and carbon from a number of different members here, and I'll leave it at that, but I think the last meeting was almost predominantly taken up by that argument.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Massey. It's a good point. However, I'll say regarding last meeting that we had a witness who, in his testimony, talked about the idea of buying food now and paying later as it pertains to credit card rates and so on and so forth. I think that opened the door. But I will ask members to try to remind themselves of the topic of this particular study, though I've been pretty lenient with everyone across the aisles. Monsieur Garon, vouliez-vous intervenir ou
Mr. Garon? Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to add something, and with all due respect to my colleague, I understand that it may appear that we're swaying from the topic of our study, but first of all, let me say that I agree with your remarks. But we also have witnesses here who do lobbying. The CFIB, for example, they are lobbying the government to abolish the carbon tax. So in that context, I think it's absolutely appropriate to allow our colleagues to continue with this line of questioning. Mr. Garon? Thank you for that comment, and Mr. Massey as well. I would prefer the members to use their time as they wish, so I let Mr. Bathieu speak about the subject for some 10 minutes. So I think it is up to each member to see how you wish to use your time, all the while staying as closely tied to the subject as possible.
If I could just wrap up, I just wanted to get your view on whether there's a correlation between carbon pricing and food price inflation. Can you maybe comment on that? Because it seems like there's a lot of overblown statements made in the House of Commons, in my view.
In other research that I've done, sir, and that is published on our Centre for Future Work's website, I've shown there's no empirical correlation between the carbon price in Canada and the rate of inflation, period, including inflation on food items. And I have identified other factors that are certainly more culpable in high food prices, including the fact that retail profit margins in the grocery industry have more than doubled and stayed unusually high since the pandemic. So I would conclude that carbon pricing is not relevant to the food price challenges that many Canadians have been facing.
Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses. Quick question to follow up on MP Massey's question for Mr. Stafford. Mr. Stafford, I have sought from the banks through this hearing to ask for the return on equity percentage, which would not betray revenue, cost structures, any of that, would just know just how profitable they are. Do you see that as being proprietary, just having a return on equity percentage disclosed?
Well, I believe, sir, that we should be able to see that from their overall corporate financial statements, return on equity in the overall operation. But broken down according to the different divisions of it, I think is a reasonable ask. And, they obviously don't want to share any more information with their competitors than they have to. And if they're making a very strong return in one line of business, that's going to attract the attention of their competitors. So I understand why they don't want to release it. But again, my point would be charter banks are given a very special privilege, literally the power to create money through new lending. And in return for that, they should have special responsibilities to disclose to Canadians how that power is being used.
Yeah, that's a great point. They're a government-protected oligopoly, and with that protection comes responsibilities perhaps different if it were a free and open market in financial services. Mr. Chair, I would like to resume the debate, if I could, with apologies to the witnesses, on my production order motion for MasterCard. Members will recall I moved a motion earlier in this study that production of all documents, emails, memos, materials related to the Liberal government's $50 million handout to MasterCard, including the communications between ISED, PCO, and PMO with MasterCard regarding the grant, and the committee report to the House to express its concern regarding the value for money for taxpayers on the nearly 50 million taxpayer dollars given to MasterCard by the Trudeau Liberal government. And the reason for that, of course, is that we learned in this study that they had about $26 billion of global revenue, about $11 billion of gross operating income, yet we're willing to take $50 million from the Canadian taxpayer to set up a cybersecurity center, which, of course, is sort of the ante up at the poker game. If you're going to be in a credit card business, you better be pretty careful on security and cybersecurity. And so they seemed shocked at the time, at the beginning of this study, that somebody would actually question them. I asked them if they would pay it back, since they don't seem to really need the money. And they baffled and skated and did all the things that a global company like that would do. So I would propose again that we could expedite this if we quickly voted on it and move on.
So, Mr. Perkins, you're moving it because there's no such thing as resuming debate when a meeting has been adjourned, if I'm not mistaken. So you're moving the motion. Perfect. It's been duly moved, and members had been given notice of the motion on Monday, October 7th. Are there any comments on the motion? You've, at the time, Mr. Turnbull.
Maybe I could just ask Mr. Perkins to clarify what the purpose of this is. So was it to, I think, recoup funding or something like that? Is that what you were? What's the purpose of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's trying to find out the rationale and paper trail behind why the government would think that giving this company $50 million of taxpayer money and what special arrangements were made for something that it seems to be pretty basic to their operating business. That if they don't have protection of security and cybersecurity, they don't have a credit card business, don't know why they need taxpayer money for that, any more than Loblaws needed money for fridges.
Okay, Mr. Turnbull.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that this particular cybersecurity initiative, that the global payments network giant invested $510 million in this to essentially prevent cybersecurity fraud. And, it's providing 270 jobs to people. So there's significant amounts of students and cooperatives that have been created, and essentially it's enhancing our security for consumers. So I think the intention of the initiative, is my understanding, is to ensure that the security required to protect consumers is being increased over time, and that there's innovation happening with the company having invested quite a significant amount in the process. So, but what I'm trying to gain is it the opposition's intention here that somehow there's a contribution agreement that has been violated, that the terms of that agreement have been violated? Like, what would be the rationale for what is proposed here? So it says, and that the committee report to the House to express its concern regarding the value for money for taxpayers on the nearly $50 million. So is it, I guess what I'm trying to determine here is the intention to recoup those funds in some way? Like, is that what, I mean, the government grants all kinds of dollars out for various purposes, and this one is to enhance cybersecurity for payment processors. That obviously, there's some benefit to that to the Canadian consumers, and a sizable number of jobs. So is that the intention?
Just before, because I understand the questions, but that's not how it works, Mr. Turnbull. You can ask your questions, but then I have a speaking order. So are you on your?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just posing the question in terms of debate. I think I can pose questions in my interventions. I wasn't suggesting that Mr. Perkins could answer right away.
I was not as much afraid as that as Mr. Perkins is jumping in and having a back and forth between the two of you guys, as much as I enjoy it, but that's not how it works.
After all the testimony we've seen on this credit card study, there are a lot of questions that have been raised about why the federal Liberal government has not moved on certain issues. My colleague from the NDP, Mr. Massey, raised this study, which I think has brought up a lot of questions that it's incumbent upon this committee to answer. And I feel like getting a little bit more background on the government's rationale and conversations on this contribution might shed light on the broader issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other, unless Mr. Badaway, I think you didn't want to speak. Okay, so we are done with speakers on the amendment. I suggest we put it to a vote. I think we've heard it all. So, Madam Clerk, let's put the amendment that Mr. Massey has proposed that you receive to a vote.
Mr. Turnbull.
Oppose.
Mr. Ariel. Mr. Badaway. Monsieur Rahira. Mr. Van Bynen. Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
Mr. Généreux.
Wait.
Mr. Patzer.
Yes.
Ms. Rempel Gardner.
Yes.
Mr. Garon.
Oui.
And Mr. Bachrach.
Yes.
Alors, l'amendement est adopté. Ça nous ramène à la motion telle qu'amendée.
The amendment passes. This brings us back to the motion as amended.
Just a time check. I think we only have 3 minutes left. If the Liberals are finished talking, then we could have a vote. If not, we'll have to deal with this again at the next meeting.
Well, I'm afraid it's not just the Liberals. I have Mr. Patzer and MP Rempel Garner that I have on my list, but we are nearing, and Mr. Turnbull, so as you know, the rules are so made that until we've exhausted the list of speakers, and I've got a few Conservatives, a few Liberals, we can't put it to a vote. That being said, it is 5:30, and as interesting as was your speech, Mr. Badaway, we'll have to pick it up from where you left it, because, colleagues, the meeting is adjourned.